short story collection which won the 2020 Oregon Book Award in fiction. She is also an Oregon Literary Fellow and an aspiring leader of her very own dog army. She currently lives in Portland with her spouse, children, and poodles, and is working on an upcoming novel and another collection of short stories. Much of her written work is guided by her childhood in Africa and America and an unshakable urge to change the female experience in the world. Please give a warm welcome to Kesha Ajose Fisher.
Thank you, Alicia. Is that clear enough? Thank you to Lake Oswego Library for inviting me. Thanks to all of you for coming out on a Tuesday evening, hanging out in the streets of Lake Oswego with me. I'm always so grateful to be invited anywhere to talk about what I love so much. And most importantly, to share about these stories that while I was creating them, I had so many questions about, what being a woman was to me, what motherhood required of me, 4 children, and then what life required of me after I became a mother, became a wife, and then decided that I also wanted to be a writer on top of everything else I had to do. And these stories came out of a dream to step outside of all that had been required of me, and finally do something that I loved. And they were all very sad things. um, I had a lot of disappointments in my childhood, and drawing from that was helpful in telling these stories. When I came to the States from Nigeria when I was 11 years old, I didn't find what everyone said was going to be available to me. That's, milk and honey in the streets, everyone breakdancing, life was going to be awesome every minute of every day. That was not the reality that we met. So I write about that too. When I became an adult and I wanted to serve my community and also make a living serving my community, I worked with immigrant refugees and from Africa, mostly as a family advocate at one point. And I was finding that I was hearing a lot of the same stories, right? America, there's this promise outside of here that this is where everyone comes to acquire their dreams. And it seemed that we all had the same stories as, excuse me, as women who were starting their lives over. I wasn't escaping a war-torn country. I wasn't worried about my safety, but we were escaping what my mother feared was a world that was, swallowing her whole if she didn't come back to her family in America. And a lot of that time also tends to show up in these stories. When I, in a Nigerian household, when you say, or when you're asked what you want to be, the are only 2 answers, right? Doctor, lawyer, well, and recently there's been engineer. Anything outside of that, you can pack your things and go, right? And I remember saying I wanted to be a writer, a storyteller. I just wanted to talk. And talking wasn't allowed as the youngest girl in the house. Sit down, be quiet, and let us tell you how it's going to be. Next best thing was to put them down in writing, and that's what I did, and somehow ended up here still. It is nice to hear from family members who I think would have preferred that I was somewhere carving someone open and pulling out parts and sewing it back together than up here sharing what's inside of me instead. But somehow the universe pieced itself together and gave me this one thing that I've always wanted, and it was to tell stories. And when I did tell these stories about women and what it meant to me to be female and what my obligations were to the world, to my children, to my spouse, to myself, 9 stories fell out of me, and a lot of them heartbreaking. But one of them was full of so much love And that's one I will be sharing with all of you tonight because I feel like I want to be in love again tonight. Anyway, I feel like during this time of year, we focus on family. We focus on a lot. We tend to focus on a lot of the stresses, don't we? Everything I hear is about how I don't want to see family because it's overwhelming, and I tend to cherish the people around me, the people that love me, the people that I know will be there. Every time I open my eyes, I know I'm supported and loved by all of these amazing people, and I'm choosing this one story that always made me feel that sense of belonging from the very first word. No God Like the Mother began as just a dream. We ended up winning this award that changed my life. I'm so grateful to be here today to share how it's going so far. But I never would have expected that I could dream it as I did and have it work out as it did. And I'm grateful to all of you for spending your time with me this evening. The story that I want to share today is titled The Silence Between Us. It's about love between two young people that the world will not permit because the boy comes from a family that works for the girl's family, and they at some point during their childhood fall in love and don't know that love is what's occurred between them. But it has happened, and life as we know it for them pulls them apart in ways that they can't understand until they're old enough to make sense of it. Okay, are we ready? Okay, the silence between us. The day Kareem was born, I was already yawning inside my mother's arms. He would take his mother's milk and hear her coo into the folds of his ears. Fatima said his name, Kareem, and still swears that he smiled from hearing it. I would not hear my own name until my mother died, and my father cried out, Emilola, I'll name her after you. Kareem was not my brother, but I called him that when the words came to me. He named me sister, though he already had two. Life became a daily unearthing of lessons derived from running and falling and laughing and hiding in the fields in my father's compound. It was there, beneath my orange tree, on a quiet, sunny afternoon, that I discovered my first loose tooth. I opened my mouth and Kareem peered in. See, I said, as I pushed the tooth to and fro until it came out. Kareem glanced away when blood swelled and spilled through the hole in my mouth. Cradling the tooth in my palm, I said, look at it. He covered his eyes. Mumu, wo, I ordered. He lowered his hand. Together we marveled at the stone-like nugget surrounded by red. Yours will come out today or tomorrow, I promised, digging into the ground. Kareem fingered each one of his teeth. None of them are soft now. Don't worry, Kareem. We were both born on the same day. Your mom said we walked and talked at the same time. We are both 6. Yours will fall soon. I buried my tooth with dirt while Kareem looked over my shoulder. He seemed sad that it happened to me first. I wanted him happy again, and I wanted to be the one to make him so. Before I lifted that rock, I pictured a different ending. After I dropped the rock against his mouth, I wanted only for him to stop screaming. I told Fatima, he just started crying when I turned around. Fatima gasped with one hand over her mouth and quickly picked up her son. Kareem, move your hand, she pleaded. Let me see. When he lowered his hands, her eyes widened and she gasped. I shouted, Kareem, what did you do? He wept, I'm sorry. I kept my hands atop my head, shaking as if still in shock. He glanced at me, then away. I hurt my own self, Mama. Fatima carried him to the bathroom and stripped him naked inside the tub. As the water ran, she caught handfuls of it and rushed it to his mouth, one after the other, begging for his silence. Shh, shh. As long as Fatima had been our housemaid, I'd never seen her moved by panic. When she carried Kareem out in a towel, she spat. Emmy, bring his clothes. I flinched and stared at his soiled clothing strewn about on the floor. Instead of touching the bloody clothes, I used a hanger to drag them closer to the tub. I left the bathroom when I heard a scream in the parlor. Kareem's 13-year-old twin sisters fawned over him, worse than his mother, as if they had birthed him themselves. All the while, Kareem was crying on Daddy's sofa with a bath towel around his body and a smaller one pressed against his wound. He cried until silence. Nope. He cried until sleep silenced him. Upon his waking, Fatima fed him fish broth, 1 spoon at a time, and sent the girls to buy ice cream. When Daddy returned from work, no one scattered at his presence as they usually did. He kept our hug short to tend to Kareem and Fatima. Years later, just after Kareem and I turned 11, the two of us were sitting under my orange tree. I asked if he remembered that day. He raised a hand to the scar on his top lip. Yes, now. Our eyes paused on one another. I asked, did you tell anyone? Tell anyone what? What happened? Don't you remember? His smile lifted the scar and his dimples appeared. I remember sitting in the back of your daddy's car. That's all you remember? No. I remember my mama was crying in the front seat, and you were staring out the window next to me. Then your daddy turned on the radio, and my mama stopped crying, and the full moon followed us all the way to the hospital. It was the best day of my life. The best day of your life? He nodded and pointed to the sky to persuade me of his statement's truth. Or Laurent, it was. I shook my head at Kareem and looked down at Daddy's crossword puzzle in my lap. My wedding day will be the best day of my life, I said. He sat closer to me as I sang about white gowns and presents and 6 slaughtered cows and how sad it was that getting married was as far into the future as flying cars. Chimaka, our gardener's brute of a son, came over. Are you two keeping secrets? I snapped. No. He said to Kareem, come and see my sword. By sword, he meant a stupid stick, but Kareem rose off the ground with joy, keen to follow. He did not heed my glare, urging him to stay. They ran circles around me, chuckling about nonsensical things as they knocked their sticks together. Chimaka twirled his branch above his head and kept calling it a sword, pronouncing the silent W. Kareem saw me seething and laughed. Angered, I blurted out, it's pronounced S-O-R-D, sword. They stared at me as if trapped inside my words. It was always like that with the help's children whenever I corrected their English. They would just glare at me as if dazed. I often pictured them babbling in vernacular as they ran around the yard, playing through their days and mocking me while I was forced behind a desk in a classroom. A week earlier, I had come home from school to find the seat of my swing broken. I asked Kareem, and he shrugged. None of the others wanted to admit to breaking it either, even when Daddy lined them up and threatened to sack their parents. Who broke this thing, Sha? He asked, with his left eye twitching. Standing beside Daddy, I added in pidgin, now who brick 'em? They all kept their eyes to the floor. The silence continued. I saw Daddy remove his belt. 2 lashes each then. Standing before Halima, one of Kareem's twin sisters, Daddy ordered her to turn around. Kareem's hand went up. I did it, sir. Halima stepped back in line. Karim took 2 lashes, plus 2 more, for making Daddy wait. Later, when I asked Karim for the truth, he shrugged and said, "It's in the past." I started inviting Karim to read with me at bedtime after that. He listened intently and expressed astonishment, as if the words blossomed right off the pages before him. He was a good listener, unlike Shimaka, whose mind wandered off to places that caused him to shout angrily when confusion set in. I detested Shimaka, and his abhorrence for me was palpable. On the afternoon of his sword fight with Karim, as I filled the boxes of my puzzle in the shade of my orange tree, Chimaka dug acutely into me, repeating himself, "Sword, sword, sword." Karim laughed. I gathered my books and dragged the shame behind me in a huff. When I reached the top of the stairs, I was alone. Over the balcony, I saw a strange transition taking place below. Karim and Chimaka were spinning hand in hand, leaving space between them and me. I wanted to scream, but when my mouth opened, nothing came. Inside the house, I was met by the cloudy aroma of boiling chicken stew. I went into the kitchen where Karim's mother, Fatima, stirred the pot and sink with her sluggish humming. She tightened the yellow scarf around her head and said, "Emilola, come in. Have you finished playing with Karim?" I did not respond. She spoke softly. "Emmy, have you finished playing with Karim?" Stone silent, I stared at the refrigerator for a moment and opened the door. My flask of water was shoved near the back. I grew frustrated trying to grab it. When Fatima repeated her question again, I snapped, leave me alone. I don't play with Karim anymore." Fatima turned around to see my face. "What happened?" I drank my water and repeated, "I will never play with Karim again." "What happened, my dear?" she begged, her expression awash with panic. She called me dear, as if I belonged to her. Her hands on my shoulders, she poured over me with the same languid eyes he had. Her calmness was another quality he shared, and it tore right through me. I had the power to sever the torture of her serenity, I knew, and the longer she cut into me with Karim's eyes, the more she fueled my indignation. "Don't touch me," I spat, smacking her hand before I knew what I had done. Heat moved through my body. Fatima's eyes watered. I wished to go back in time, to moments earlier, maybe even before the few steps before I entered the kitchen. But I landed on the day she handed me a bottle while Karim ate from the warmth of her bosom. Each time I climbed onto her lap and lifted her blouse, she would gently fold my hands away. I used to say, "Mama," because I heard Karim say it, and it pained me profoundly when she kissed my cheek one day and said, "No, call me Auntie Fatima." Now she was touching me and calling me dear. Fatima was staring at me inside my father's kitchen, knowing she was not my mother, making me feel it more than I ever had. Losing care of my tongue, I shouted, "Karim should respect me, you know." Fatima's bow implied she'd heard something worse. "I will make sure of it," she replied. I guzzled my water and threw the emptied flask on the counter. Fatima flinched. My heart felt like it plunged into my stomach. The words "I am sorry" would have easily reversed my tears and eased the twinge in my gut, but Karim's twin sisters spilled noisily into the kitchen, singing about the busy marketplace. 18 years old and still pint-sized. They resembled a pair of dolls in their matching yellow saris and finished each other's sentences as if they had rehearsed it. "Abalende market is too much for me," said Halima as she unraveled the fabric around her head. "Too much, oh," added Sophia. Halima planted herself in front of the standing fan, and her words whirred through the slats. And the bus kept taking more and more passengers. Yes, Sophia chimed in, more and more passengers. After greeting their mother with pecks on each of her cheeks, they began unraveling nylon bags, tossing yams and plantains into bins, opening and slamming cupboard doors. Halima gushed about a grocery store she had seen in a movie. There was meat, clean, no blood anywhere. I coughed when it seemed the twins would carry on that way forever. They turned to me. As if sharing a mouth, they asked, Emmy, Karim is not with you? Why should he be with me? I barked, with my palms spread wide. Am I his mother? Each girl glanced over at Fatima, whose eyes were locked onto the simmering pot of stew. When they turned around in my direction, I felt as if time was slowly inching by. They responded in unison, Sorry, Emilola. Now, 3 of them kept their eyes locked on the linoleum floor. The air stiffened, and my body steeled itself. All I wanted was for someone to speak or shout or just tell me why losing Karim made it so difficult to breathe. I want to pause there for a second and check on time. See how everyone's doing. Can I bring some coffee, some wine? Should I continue for a little bit longer? This is just an introduction to how feelings arise when we least expect, and especially in children, we don't always know what it means. That's how it made sense in my head, so I put it on paper. Okay, I can continue from there for a bit longer. In the evening, Daddy and I sat at the table eating rice smothered in chicken stew. He lifted a glass of water to his mouth. The liquid seeped through his mustache before reaching his lips. I licked meat off a drumstick and hurriedly gathered rice into my mouth. Displeased by the scraping against the plate or the way I used my fingers to help the rice onto the spoon, Daddy said, Slow down now. Where are your manners? But rice keeps falling off my fork, I yelled. Watch your tone. He pointed his doughy index finger at me. And use a knife as well. Nonsense. I stared at the bushy curls amassed at his knuckles and nodded. He did not see me roll my eyes. You really should know how to use a knife and fork when it's in front of you, you know. Yes, Daddy. He tilted his head and placed eyes on me. What is wrong with my sweet, happy girl? Nothing, Daddy, I said, evading his look. His heavy hand was suddenly on top of mine. My darling Emilola, what is the matter? I knew speaking my truth would send Daddy into a fit, and I found that side of him despicable. Unless he was defending me, of course. Karim once told me that Daddy caught his former driver stealing money from his briefcase. He said he heard my father dragging the man around our compound. Sometimes Karim embellished the truth, but he was no liar. When he said Daddy forced mud into the driver's mouth, I found that hard to believe. But when he added that Daddy stood above the driver and yelled, Don't ever take what is mine, that I believed. He hated thieves. Karim further described Daddy ripping off the man's clothes and chasing him away in the nude. While Daddy had done things one could consider strange, I could not fathom him making a man walk naked through that part of Ikoyi and scaring all the new white neighbors. Daddy drummed his fingers against the table. Emilola, stop daydreaming and tell me what the matter is. I don't want to go to school in America. He rose suddenly out of his seat and dropped his fork on the plate. The crash from metal against porcelain drew Fatima from the kitchen, covered in suds at the knees. Oga, wetin happen, sir? She cried. Daddy shouted, I'm speaking to my daughter. Fatima bowed. His tone subsided. Go out, please. Fatima backed out. He sighed and turned to me. Now, what is this nonsense about you don't want to go to school in the States? I eyed the sweat crawling down his neck. His eyebrows bunched to meet in the middle of his forehead. When logic should have stilled my tongue, panic loosened my lips. I used the firmest voice I possessed. I am not moving away. Shut up, he yelled. I crossed my arms. All my friends from primary school are heading to Holy Child. Why do I have to go to another country for secondary school? It's stupid. Then I saw the man from Karim's tale. The sting in his rage remained on my cheek well into the night. When I saw his shadow hanging behind the curtain on my bedroom door, I shouted, "Go away. I hate you." Breakfast was quiet. Daddy took tea without condensed milk and hardly touched his food. I stared at the egg swimming in a layer of palm oil on his plate, hoping he would break the yolk with the edge of his toast. Had he done so, I would have called it disgusting and pretended to want to vomit, and he would have laughed. Instead, he threw his napkin on the table, called for the driver, and left without saying goodbye. Karim's lanky body was crouched at the base of the stairwell when I came down. I hurried past him, as if he blended with the air. He followed my full-bodied walk, trailing behind like a duckling. Without stopping, I hollered, "Why are you following me?" "I always walk you to your school," he replied. "I thought you were busy playing with your new best friend, Chimaka." "He's not." "Well," I said with a shrug, "you tell him everything, though." "I don't. He is a foolish boy. I wouldn't trust him with my secrets." Karim went silent. "I just wish he would go away," I said. Karim shouted, "Me too." I stopped and turned around. "Why, did he do something to you too?" "Doesn't matter. It's in the past," Karim said. I wagged my finger at him. "You should tell your mom." He shook his head. "It's no problem. I can tell her for you. What did he do?" He shrugged. "Nothing." When he smiled, the scar pulled his lip askew. "Okay," I said as I turned around. "I think I want to be alone." "Emmy, then please let me carry your bag," he offered. "It looks heavy today." "Do you promise to tell your mom?" He nodded. When my bag hung on his left shoulder, his right hand reached for mine. We smiled every time our eyes met. As we walked, a rabid dog in a disoriented haze wandered near the roundabout. We veered away from it. "That thing is still alive?" I asked. Karim chuckled. "I heard it bit Chimaka. That's why he's a wild animal." "Yes," I concurred. "Chimaka is a wild animal." We ran hand in hand as if headed safely into a future set solely for two. We did not stop laughing until we reached the gates of my school. I accepted my bag from him and crossed the dirty, pockmarked street through the gates and onto the manicured lawn of the schoolyard. When I turned to leave, his wink assured me that the only thing between us was time. I'm going to stop. I'll pause there and share with you that I love these characters. I don't know where they came from, but I loved imagining a world where two people could be so different in a society where, of course, it's not allowed. I mean, of course, you can do whatever you want, but it didn't seem like their love would ever be something they could watch flourish in the world, and I wanted to tell that story. But in true Kesha Ajose Fisher sense, right, it can't end, with them running off into the sunset, because life happens to all of us. I hope that you all will finish reading the story on your own, because I was only allotted a little bit of time, and I'm so grateful to be able to share that much with you. I was told that once I finished reading, if anyone had questions, this would be a great time. Anyone want to talk about what we discussed this evening? Kevin, I would love some tea. Do you mind, please? I brought my husband and I put him to work uh, um, to make me tea. So, yes, I see a hand waving.
Dreams, and you talked about the characters and where they come from. Do you dream of the characters? Is a waking dream? And also, the characters then take their own life, and once you start a story, do you know where it's going, or the characters let you know where it's going? How
I,
does this happen?
can I tell you that whenever I hear this question, I always say it's all the voices in my head, right? Every inappropriate thing I've ever wanted to say, it's stuck in there, and I put it down in words. I believe that the reason I have all these voices in my head is because they need some place to live, and everything I've ever written, I want to say, starts with a thought or a line. There's a story in here where my children were very little, and they weren't sleeping, right, as newborns, do. And I remember lying there thinking or feeling and believing that this was true, this thought, I haven't slept in years. And I got out of the bed. I could lie there and stare at the ceiling and wait for morning to come where I get to do it all over again, or I could get up and just start writing it. And that was one of the stories where I sat up, wrote down the line, I haven't slept in years, and that became a story. And which one is that story? That one is Sleep, which is, thank you. Thank you, sir.
I hate that story.
I know, it makes you cry. You said. So it sometimes happens that words show up in my head, and then I need to find some place to make them make sense. The only one that I will say, out of all of these stories that I pulled from my real life, is the very last story, Snow by Morning. And, we do that too, right? And in storytelling, I can't make up everything. I've got to share a little bit of the truth. Unlike tonight, right? My truth, I'd be in here in my jammies. So, and for the most part, a thought comes to mind, or as in, what would I say, the Bride Price, which happens to be a story about FGM, and horrifically, that story was true in my life, not with me, but a story that I'd heard about a girl who, when she turned 9, had to then go have this surgery performed. And it always stuck with me from when I was a little girl, and especially because that girl was so excited about going to have this thing done, and then we never saw her again. And none of the adults talked about what might have happened to this child. No one ever brought it up again, and it's like her existence vanished. And I'd always had her in mind and wanted to tell a story. Of course, it's not true to her or her family, but the idea that such a horrific thing exists in the world was something I wanted to address, and that's kind of pulled from someone who was real in my life. And outside of that, the stories show up, and I put them down. Yes, please.
No one else is raising.
No, let's go. Let's do it. It's you and me. Let's.
Inspired. Do you say, okay, I'm not inspired, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write? So it's easy when you get the inspiration.
Right.
But what about those times when you're not inspired, or you have
I do have a routine. I have a routine that I have to abide by because I have small children who need my time early in the morning. When they go to school, the children are big now, but the 13-year-old is this big. I stick to my routine because it's helpful to me. And you're right, sometimes thoughts come to mind that I can't write about because I haven't done enough research or it doesn't matter enough to me. But when I have conversations, mainly with college students, when we talk about the art of writing or why we're drawn to this need to tell stories, I often suggest that when we have that feeling that we've heard titled writer's block, or we feel trapped in a story that just isn't coming, is the best thing to do is to just, step away and not to not write. What I do in my break, when I find myself pounding on that door that just won't open, is I'll, look around the room, right? Pick a word. If it's book, if it's cup, it's whatever it is. And my suggestion is often pick one word, right? We're surrounded by billions, or I don't know, has someone counted? How many words are we surrounded by in this room? Pick one, and then write whatever it is that you want about it. If it's one paragraph or one sentence, I found that helps me unlock whatever it is that's plugging my mind. And often it's, tasks, chores, kind of hooking my thoughts, or, a conversation I've had with a friend who needs me and it's pulling me, or, the dogs need to go out for a million times, or the millionth time in the last hour. So I take that break, and it's often my suggestion: take a break, pick a word, and then build something from it, and then tear it up. Don't do nothing with it, but it works for me in that it unclogs the junk. Yeah, thank you. Yes. Sorry.
Words
And then you.
that around the block, when you take words further than they've gone before, you put them in your own unique way. And can I just ask a question regarding the title?
Yeah.
No God, like the mother. Now, they're not the same, but as you go with your stories for direction and for depth and for meaning, do you find the God there?
Oh, that's a great question. The title, I'll tell you where it first came from, right? The origination of this title was from this phrase I grew up hearing in Nigeria. And this time around, I got to add it to the title of the book, Orisha Bi Yakosi. So if a child is seen disrespecting its mother, or someone else is watching, they'll, everyone's allowed to snatch up a kid and say, hey, you love God, yet you disrespect your mother. Don't you know there's no God greater than your mother, right? And finding mothers on equal footing, or presented on equal footing with God, who, when I was being raised in Nigeria, God was above all. And so the first time I saw God presented side by side with this being that we were taught as all-knowing, all-being, Olorun, Orisha, the gods, all of them, something opened in me. I don't think I saw my mother in the same way, right? I regarded her as this heavenly being from then on. And in my story, I lost my mother many, many times and had to live with lots of different women. And each time they all seemed godlike to me, and not always in a good way. It always felt like they were the ones tugging on all the strings, right? If you believe in God in that regard. And so when I was telling stories, when I decided that I would be telling stories about women and mothers and our relationship with our mothers and their relationship with themselves and the world, I was, reminded of that saying, Orisha Bi Yakosi. Don't you know there's no God greater than the mother? And of course, they don't all show up as godlike, as all-knowing, or all-being, or good at drawing strings even, right? Some of them fumbled their gifts. And it still felt like they deserved this title. And so that made it onto the book. I hope that answered the question, because I could ramble about that all night long.
In some ways, someone's trying to elevate the respect of mothers, what mothers should have.
Yeah.
But it almost makes the God, and what's good about all you relate in your story is the God becomes every day.
Yeah.
And that's your story.
Yeah. Thank you for seeing that, or relaying that in that regard, right? The message is that the answers are everywhere. I wish I hadn't had such a broken mother as my birth mother. I had many to live with, but it always felt like she was looking for something outside of herself, outside of the world, when and I didn't understand this until I became a mother, right? It always felt like she was looking for something else. Never saw herself as worthy enough of all of these healthy children, 4 children, all of them healthy. Well, my older brother, he's a little mad sometimes, but she had all these healthy children, people who loved her. This home that she invited everyone into. She got to build a life outside of America, by the way. She'd gone to Nigeria and made, well, carved out a world for herself, right? Opportunities that would have never been afforded to her in the States. She went there and made it happen. And people would line up for, hours before her restaurant opened just to, sit and stare at this beautiful American woman who's come and infiltrated, their lives, but in a good way, right? And she never saw the beauty in any of that, and often broke my heart that she left us at a really young age, not knowing her impact on the world, until someone that worked for us when we lived in Nigeria 30 years ago showed up at her funeral. And imagine if she'd known that she touched someone, in 1984, and here they are at 2014, showing just to pay their respects because they met her once or twice in a whole different part of the world. So I don't know. I will use it as a reminder for myself. When I'm annoyed with the children, or I'm tired, or I haven't slept in years, I will it's a good reminder that I as a mother, I've chosen that role. I love these children more than anything in the world. I feel they love me, and I want to make sure that I, as present as I can be for them. And now that my thoughts are out in the world, which is scary, by the way, everything I thought, I put it down. Now you can all see in my head. I owe it to them. I owe it to the girls coming behind me who also want to tell stories. To, feel free to share the thoughts in your head, and trust that the lessons are everywhere. You raised your hand, and then you.
I was going to say the last story, the snow in the morning. That is a personal experience that you've had, because the end of that story is hopeful, but I wondered what happened. And
yeah.
now, do I know what the end is?
Well, okay. We're all friends, and this won't go out anywhere, will it, cameraman? This is between us. What happens at Lake Oswego Library stays. Yes. I'm working on a book now about a fictionalized version of my mother's experience when she went to Nigeria, and all of these amazing people that came in and out of our lives, and this tiny restaurant of hers. I think I thought she was just the most beautiful human being I've ever met in my life, as damaged as she was. And after I'd written 8 of these stories, I wondered what the world would think if I shared that life had revealed to me that a mother is capable of putting her own child into the arms of danger and walking away. And that's hard to do. My mother was still alive when I started writing it, and she knew that I was writing this book, and yes, it's all made up, mostly. But the truth is, my mother did walk me into this apartment, and under the pretense that they were going to do this amazing thing for me, and then I had to learn a lesson about the world that I don't wish on anyone. You ask how it ends. We ended hopeful, because it's. Imagine if I told you that the girl escaped and she's standing here in front of you now, that'd be a boring story. Well. It's a hard one to digest sometimes, right? Because to tell a story like that, you have to walk back through those doors, and if my goal is to be honest with readers about experiences that I want them to actually feel, then I have to feel all the feelings.
Well, I was with you every
Thank you. I never know. That one always stumps me. I never know what to say. Yes, yes. It was based on truth, right? This is mostly fictitious book, but I am drawing from truths in the world, right? I'm drawing from families that I had conversations with, the immigrant refugees and that I worked with as a family advocate, right? Stories come to me from there, and sometimes I process it through writing. And that's what I was doing with this story, Snow by Morning, was trying to make sense of a broken relationship with my mother and where it might have come from. That is one of the chapters from the next book I'm working on. And so the test on the world was, can I squeeze this little story between all of these other, often painful stories? Can I just tuck this in there and see how it feels? And I'm glad that I did, because it forced me to have a conversation with my mother before we left, right? And forced me to process it with my sister, who didn't know. No one in my family knew, because when Mom did come back eventually, I was then sworn to secrecy and held on to it for much into my adulthood. Yeah, it was a necessary part of the process. I'll say that. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, please.
I'm in the process of reading it and really enjoying it. And the story that I'm loving about the 17-year-old that's having her baby, and the assumptions that someone is making about, and how you just explain what's going on in her head.
Yeah.
And what this other person is assuming, and you kind of think it's not humorous, but in some ways
You have to laugh.
you have to, because
Yeah.
the 17-year-old is very together with going, I have my own thoughts, and I love,
Yeah.
I love the characters and their strengths.
Thank
And
you.
oftentimes they're kept inside.
Yeah. Where it's safest, right? Where it's safest sometimes. Thank you for acknowledging this poor girl, right? She's 17 years old, right? Most of the time we think we have all the answers we'll ever need to live our lives, and we can't wait to break away from our parents, and life is going to fall into our laps, and we'll enjoy every minute of it until we realize that we're still attached to the cord is invisible, but it's still there. And this girl wanted to just prove that she could make a really difficult choice and see it through. And she loves her child, right? She, I think I even say, if I can remember my own words, right? She was ecstatic to be a mother. It's the world that's reminding her that it's bad. It's going to be tough. You won't have, it's going to be hard being a single mother. You won't have you won't meet all of your dreams. And inside, she just loves this baby. And that's, yes, the world is right sometimes that it's going to be, she's now in a difficult situation, but why can't she also just be with her baby? Was the reason for that story. And then we find out that, both can be true. She can love her baby and want the best for it, and the world can be right that, you've got a storm coming your way. Yeah. Thank you. I hope you get to the end of the book. Just, have some tissues handy and know that, you're doing real hard work. I promise. I'm not tearing your heart open for no reason. Hopefully I piece it together at some point. Yes, please.
Having met you before I read the book, as I was reading it,
I was going to say I recognize both of you.
I felt like every story in there was you just talking about yourself, people you knew, and yes, there's a lot of heartbreaking moments in it. So I to say that your writing made me feel that nothing about it was fiction. And I truly felt like
gosh. Oh, I hope no one's experiencing these things. But you know, to have a real conversation, right? You wouldn't feel anything if I didn't write it from a truthful place. I said to tell that story about my own experience, I had to go walking through those doors again, and it wasn't pleasant. I could write it sweetly, but where, I don't know. The honesty was always my guiding light, right? I mean, I've read some of these stories where I'm sitting there and I'm just like, well, why does that feel like, you know? Why do I want to cry? I could just erase it and write something sweet and I'd be fine. But I think it was knowing that if I told myself the truth about what the world has shown me, then you'll all see it too. If I lied about the world and painted a rosy picture, you'll see that, but then you won't be touched. The point in my wanting to tell stories has always been to touch people in ways that I can't. I'm not allowed, it's illegal for me to come touch you, right, physically. But how else do you touch people than with your words when you do it honestly? I'm glad that it reached you no, I'm not glad that it reached you in a painful place. I'm glad that you were touched by it. And I also don't wish any of these experiences on anyone. Although I will say the baby, I mean, some of them, like I said, pulled from real life and from real people. The baby not sleeping, that's from me not sleeping. When I had my daughter, my eldest daughter, very young too, and not understanding that babies just don't sleep until they want to, and not understanding that, you know, the crazy making part of early, of the first few months was a part of the process. And yeah, it comes from truth. You tell the truth, people will feel it. If I made up fairy tales, you know, I mean, we buy into Cinderella and all of those stories. Why not share a little bit of truth about what the world actually shows us? And I owe you a box of tissues. Thank you. Thank you for reading it. And thanks, I finish it. And let me know what you think. I don't know if I've surpassed time. Thank you, Alicia, and to Lake Oswego Library for having me, and all of you for coming out. Thank goodness it's dry out.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing these stories with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us this evening. And then if you'd like to purchase a book, there are books available for you to purchase as well.
Thank you. Yes. Well, I brought Kevin to work. So. Thank you.